Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Justin Rivers, and that was my alarm that the event was starting. Thank you very much for joining us at the launch of the Coalition to Save the Penn Station Powerhouse and other buildings in the neighborhood that are endangered. We will speak about that at length. This presentation is led tonight by yours truly, Untapped New York's Chief Experience Officer, Justin Rivers, Preservation Committee member of the City Club of New York, Brad Vogel, and the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, Simeon Bankoff. We are happy to have our speakers here with us this evening and you guys here to learn more about our efforts to help preserve some endangered buildings around Penn Station in the neighborhood. A couple of things while you are joining us this evening. If you're having any audio or video issues with this presentation, Livestorm may be new to a lot of you. It's not Zoom, but you can refresh your page. It will not make you log back in. You'll come right back into the presentation, but that's the best way if you're having audio or visual issues. Please feel free to chat with us here on the chat tab. You're also going to see a questions tab right next to that. If you have questions directly for us, Brad, Simeon, or myself, please put them in the question tab. We'll be sort of tag teaming, manning that. We'll also do Q&A at the end of the presentation. Also, two calls to action immediately, and I know Simeon will circle back around at the end of the presentation. We do have a link to the petition that we have started to save the endangered buildings by this new Empire Station complex. So the link is right there at the bottom of the chats I put in. And then also to register for the public hearing that is being run by the Empire State Development, there's a link there to register for the Zoom meeting next Monday at 5 p.m. So please do that if you have not already, and thank you for joining us. I am going to start the presentation today by giving you a little bit of background on the neighborhood, both historic and current. I'm also going to walk you through a very high-level look at the Empire Station Complex Plan, which has been put out by the ESD, which is the Empire State Development. I'll be referring to it as the ESD as we move along. I thank you. So I see our Untapped New York insiders are saying hello, as they always do at an insider event. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. I'm just going to get into it, though. I'm not going to do official greetings. I will greet you all when I am done. So I'm going to get rid of the chat and get started. Well, oh, I got rid of my screen instead. Hold on. Coming back. Do-do-do. You'd think I'd never done this before. And we're back. Thank you. I meant to expand it. All right. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to give you, for those of you who are familiar with my work and my presentations, both virtual and in person around the Penn, this is all content you've heard before. I'm doing it very condensed, but it is important to the genesis of this plan and some of the information we're giving you. I'm going to talk specifically about the neighborhood as it was when it was the Tenderloin, when the Pennsylvania Railroad came in the early 1900s and bought it up as a development plan for their large station complex that they were building at the time, which was a means to improve their service into New York. The Pennsylvania Railroad brought their riders into Jersey City at Exchange Place, where riders needed to take a ferry over the river. Now, the Pennsylvania Railroad's main competitor, the New York Central, had Grand Central Station at the time. And yes, it was a station. It was not a terminal yet. It won't become a terminal until 1913. So this photo that you are looking at is, I call it the Big Dig, in the Tenderloin area. The Pennsylvania Railroad bought quite a lot of land from Broadway out to the Hudson for very, very cheap prices because the neighborhood was considered to be depressed. You'll also see Macy's dead center in the background. That slab wall is 7th Avenue. That is going to be the support that the station, Pennsylvania Station, will be built on. And in a very startlingly short amount of time, they build not only the North River Tunnel, but also one of the largest train stations in the world, Pennsylvania Station, designed by McKim, Mead and White. It has many homages to a couple of European buildings. Again, for those of you familiar with my work talking about Penn, you know the 7th Avenue colonnade is inspired by the Brandenburg Gates. You're going to see a picture of the main waiting room, which is the Roman Baths of Caracalla. But I want to point out two buildings we'll be talking about today, just to give you a sense of the history where those arrows are. The top arrow is the steeple of St. John the Baptist Church, which is endangered in this plan, and it does predate Pennsylvania Station. And that pit of sand on the corner of 7th Avenue, that will become the Hotel Pennsylvania, also an endangered structure on this in this new plan. And here is the main waiting room. And of course, most of us on this presentation this evening know about the tragedy of the demolition of Penn, because Penn was a gorgeous structure, although even when it first opened, rife with some problems by ridership standards, that Grand Central sort of got a little bit better, but obviously my heart's in Penn. And this was the concourse in the back end. Just a very large, grand space, unlike, as we know, what the modern Pennsylvania Station is today. Now, of course, over time, and not very much time, about 4 decades, Penn Station declines very, very quickly. After overuse during World War II, and then lack of ridership at post-World War II because of the interstate highway system and the federalization of airports being built, Penn Station declines, and the Pennsylvania Railroad sort of never makes the revenue to keep the station up. So this picture taken in I believe this is the late 1950s, shows a very dirty, a very dark, and as people who remember the station at this time, on ground level, slightly creepy sort of navigation. And this is what the 7th Avenue facade looked like right around the time demolition begins in 1963. These photos that you're looking at, the color photos, come from Norman McGrath, who's an architectural photographer. Norman and I have been working together very closely since, I believe it's 2013. He's been very generous with his Penn demolition collection, which is, as far as I know, the only one in color. And Norman's photos are really, really quite stunning. And I always thank Norman for his contributions to my work as well. So Hilary Ballin, who wrote in the early 2000s, New York's Pennsylvania Stations, put it right. Penn Station did not make you feel comfortable. It made you feel important, meaning it was a very, very large structure, very, very grandiose, but not on a human scale. There was a lot of climbing out of Penn. When you got into New York, you had to trudge up these very, very long staircases and then continue to street level. Whereas, as a lot of us who may know Grand Central Terminal know, it was known as the Incredible Stairless Terminal. The main engineer of the New York Central, William Wilgus, made it more, there was more ease of travel throughout Grand Central Terminal. Now, after years of economic decline, the Pennsylvania Railroad has to figure out a way to recoup all of its losses, and they look to air rights. And that those air rights then spurn the development of Madison Square Garden and a office building, 29 stories on 7th Avenue, we know today as 2 Penn Plaza. This was announced in 1961. This is actually taken from a New York Times article that was run then. As we all know, Pennsylvania Station was put all below street level. And demolition begins October 28th, 1963. And as you can see, this is actually an Aaron Rose photo. The demolition process went on for about 3.5 years. And at that time, landmarks preservation was passed in 1965. So Penn becomes, as I know a lot of us know on this presentation, a poster child for preservation. Madison Square Garden builds itself sort of on top. And as you can see, this is sort of the last breath of Penn, the 7th Avenue facade going down as the superstructure of Madison Square Garden goes up. 2 Penn is not built yet. One of the only buildings associated, if not the only building associated with Penn Station to remain on 31st Street is the service station, or the Powerhouse, as we've been calling it. It goes by many titles. And this is what we inherited. This is actually a very early photo of the rotunda of Penn Station when Penn was moved underground. I believe this is late 1967, again, taken by Norman McGrath, a time period we don't always get to see with the current iteration of Penn. And so, of course, it's all driven underground. Conditions are not great. It's not easy to navigate. It's very tight, very dark and dank as opposed to the old station. And of course, as the decades go on, crowding just gets worse, as you can see here from a photo taken a couple of years ago, probably 6 or 7, considering that the old time board is there. And so Penn is maligned as one of the worst transit hubs in the world, when it is the busiest transit hub, at least in North America, and sometimes considered in the world as well. And old Penn sort of lives on as a memory. And these pictures, which were on the Amtrak concourse, don't even exist anymore. They were a big part of the tour that I still give, the remnants of Penn, and now they're gone, replaced with LED ad boards, unfortunately. So the beginning of the state coming in to redevelop Penn Station has a very long history, but I'm going to pick up at 2016, when Cuomo in January of 2016 announces that they are going to move full steam ahead on what he called back then the Farley Complex, which becomes Moynihan Train Hall. The announcement, though, comes with this Empire Station complex, which is a much larger neighborhood redevelopment, which is not only including Moynihan, but also redeveloping areas around Penn Station to give greater access into Penn and to improve the look of the neighborhood. And this was one of the early renderings that came out in January of 2016. And I noticed the coloring, and for those of you who've seen some of my virtual presentations before, you may know that this joke is coming. But again, with the name Empire Station Complex and the coloring of this rendering, it made me immediately think of the Galactic Empire from Star Wars, because I am a nerd. But there was something very ominous about this plan from the very beginning, including not only the name, but the idea that the neighborhood was going to be overturned in an attempt to make Penn more accessible. Now, what happened in the meantime was, in an homage to Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and that's a picture of him in the mid-90s with President Clinton and Governor Pataki, proposing that they use the post office, which was the James Farley post office, as a new and improved gateway into New York, which had its stops and starts, which incorporates a McKim and White building built, again, as a sister building to the station, the post office, which opens in 1912. And as we all know, this comes to pass. Now, in January of 2020, so roughly about last year, pre-pandemic, Cuomo comes out and he pushes the Empire Station Complex plan one step further by saying they are going to go ahead with a plan to increase track capacity at Penn, which actually is much needed, by the way, by increasing track count by 8 to 9 tracks and 5 platforms. This plan had been called unofficially Penn Station South. As you can see here, this was from one of his briefings in January of 2020, and it would require taking the block south of 31st Street to create this new terminal. Now, the Penn Powerhouse is on this block, also St. John the Baptist Church and other buildings that Brad will walk you through. The pandemic happens, and of course, it doesn't stymie the ESD in finishing Moynihan. Moynihan launches in January of this year, 2021, to fairly much acclaim. And again, I think, as I've been on the public record saying, deservedly so. I think the star of Moynihan is the fact that it uses the McKim and White building fairly well and shows off the architecture in an attempt to, I say this word a lot, homage Penn. So Moynihan is fairly well received, and everybody seems to think, well, this is good. We're sort of beginning to correct some of the mistakes of Penn's demolition. But under all of the opening in this, and these are Aaron Assis's photographs. I know he's on this talk today. Thank you, Aaron. Got that sumptuous acre of glass bringing light down into what was the courtyard of the post office. And this quote, when Cuomo dedicated or cut the ribbon on Moynihan, this would be an amazing accomplishment at any time, but it's an extraordinary accomplishment today. As dark as 2020 was, to me, this all brings the light, literally and figuratively. And of course, we all agree, Moynihan was a win for New York in January. I noticed in doing tours now, ending at Moynihan and seeing a lot of New Yorkers coming to enjoy this new space during a very, very sort of bleak winter with its art. It's been a real breath of fresh air. But what was sort of tucked in under all of this was a much larger Empire Station plan, which comes fleshed out a bit more. So now what I'm going to do is sort of pick out the three main points of this plan and how they threaten some of the landmark eligible buildings in the neighborhood. So this actually comes from the project plan itself. Number one, creation of a revitalized transit-oriented commercial district to benefit Penn Station and revitalize the surrounding area. Now, I'm going to go back to this in detail, but this is one of the maps to show you the 8 sites that have been chosen for the Empire Station complex around Madison Square Garden to Penn Plaza, Moynihan, and Farley. The Farley complex is not open yet, although I believe it is due to open in late spring, where Facebook will be the anchor tenant there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But you can see here, the idea behind this project is to, according to this, gain and give more access to Penn and to subway stations in the area that, according to this plan, are already lacking. Now, we're going to talk about the details of what this will actually manifest itself as through this plan in a second, but I'm going to go to point 2. Point 2 is improvements to area subway stations and transit connections with Penn Station. All right, so how that looks basically goes like this. They want to add new station entrances, new stairways, and wider platforms for the ACE. They also want to improve access to the 123, which anybody who uses the 123 knows it's very, very tricky and sometimes very confusing. That would include widening existing stairways, adding new staircases, widening platforms, also making it ADA compliant with elevators. There's also, which is not mentioned on this plan, there are corridors, connecting corridors from the LIRR to the old IRT trains or the 1 train that were part of the old station. They are also Guastavino vaults in there. Last time we talked to Amtrak, they said that they were looking at the viability of restoring those and using those. I'm not sure if that fits under this plan or not, but in my opinion, it would be a miss if they did not do that. Then you're also going to see proposed below-grade east-west corridor, final location TBD. Now, for those of you who know the history of Penn Station very well, you know that that is a reference to the Gimbels Passageway. That was the passageway that connected Penn Station to Herald Square via Gimbels, which was also part of the neighborhood within a neighborhood that was built during the rise of Penn Station in the early century, what we know today as the Manhattan Mall, which is also under threat with this plan. And what is much needed is a connection to the BDFM and QR and W over at Herald Square, because it is a real miss that the station is not connected. And they would also like to improve entryways to the IND trains and the BMT trains over there. The third point of the plan is the implementation of public realm improvements. So that means basically street level improvements in the neighborhood. That would include widening sidewalks. That's one of the biggest initiatives, as you can see, creating these ideas of shared streets. So the idea of the shared streets, which is the blue and white striped line, is to slow traffic down to 1 lane vehicular traffic and open these streets up to bikes and pedestrians as well. You could think of the sections of Broadway that are already employing that in Manhattan now. And again, adding 2 new bike lanes, reinforcing an existing bike lane. And I think what's most disappointing about this point is proposed open space, not that much open space, considering what the plan calls for building-wise, which I'm now going to show you. Again, we're going to revisit quickly creation of a revitalized transit-oriented commercial district to benefit Penn Station. This is the first point. So let me elaborate as to what this plan calls for. First, sorry, I forgot about this slide. This is a quote directly from the project description. Aside from the recent ESD-led transformation of the underutilized Farley building into Moynihan Train Hall and new commercial development, the neighborhood immediately surrounding Penn Station is characterized by outmoded office buildings, low-quality retail offerings, congested sidewalks, and limited publicly accessible open space. Yet the project area provides significant opportunity for sustainable growth in New York City due to its unmatched access to the region's rail and transit network, with potential for future development to incorporate sustainable, resilient, and energy-efficient infrastructure. Part of this is true. The neighborhood would definitely benefit from improvements, but the proposal is to wipe out many structures surrounding Penn and replace them with tall towers. And each of the sites would have 1 to 2 very tall towers, mostly office square footage, as you can see here, surrounding Penn. And you would lose a number of landmark eligible buildings with this plan, basically replaced with Vornado run, as far as I know, steel and glass towers. And 2 hotels. Here's another view. So as you can see from this perspective, it almost looks like a continuation of what's going on with the Hudson Yards. So sort of bringing these buildings up to a scale that isn't warranted in the neighborhood. This is my opinion, by the way. But the idea behind this, according to the plan, is to better Penn Station. In what I know about Penn and working in and around Penn for almost 20 years, I'm not exactly sure exactly how this betters Penn, although it says that the building of these structures would increase revenue to engage in the ESD's Penn Station master plan. Now, this is a separate plan, which would then improve conditions in Penn Station across the street from Farley Train Hall. But according to the state, to do that, we have to do the Empire Station complex first. Here's just a breakdown of some of the square footage that we could be looking at in this project proposal. So as you could see, a little over 14 million GSF, or gross square feet, of office, total commercial of almost 16 million square feet. Not a lot of garage or hotel space, but that is also added in there as well. And of course, one of the things, I'll go back just for a second, that you may notice right off the bat is it will really sort of destroy quality of light in the area as well, especially since 2 Penn, Madison Square Garden, and Farley are very low rise buildings. Now, within this footprint, there have been, and actually I'll move to the next one, 10 buildings which are already eligible for New York City landmark designation and 38 eligible for state and or national register status. So this is not, as Michelle put in her article that we ran, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, this is not a small number. This is large scale building destruction of potentially landmark buildings, a lot of which are remnants in their own way of Penn Station. Now, what's going on right now at Penn, just in case you haven't been there in a while, the state is completing one of their first phases of Penn's improvement, or the Penn Station Master Plan, which was the refit of the LIRR concourse. This project was announced in September of 2018, and the funding was made available in March of 2019. So what they're doing down there right now as we speak is they're widening the pedestrian corridors. So it's going to go out to almost 60 feet, and that's the corridor that runs from the 123 to the ACE. They've also taken down that barrel vaulted hallway, which I believe they put up in the 90s, so that they're going to get an additional 10 feet on the ceiling down there. They're improving the lighting, the finishing, ticketing, glass walls, as you can see, that will allow customers to look down into track level from the concourse, which I think will be interesting, but I haven't seen those in rendering yet. They're going to add more digital information screens, and the cost of all of this is about $600 million. It's all in the process of being paid for. It's happening right as we speak. As you can see, the LIRR is paying $170 million, and the state is funding the rest. This project will be timed to open with East Access over at Grand Central. So usually what the MTA does, they did this in the mid-90s, when they were doing restorations on Grand Central, they also updated the Long Island Railroad concourse as well. This also is meant to fit over as a connection to Moynihan. Here's a rendering. This was an early rendering that came out when this plan was announced. This is a more current rendering of that passageway in between the 123 and the ACE down in the LIRR. And the one part of this project that was completed and opened on December 31st of 2020 was this entryway out into 7th Avenue and 33rd Street. This is an actual photograph, another Aaron Assis photograph. This replaced a Maya Lin sculpture, which apparently was much loved by me, but will be hopefully replaced on the concourse. And at the moment, they are currently doing construction to get everything ready for the 2020 East Access opening. Now, the company that runs most of the retail and real estate of Penn buildings, or Penn in the neighborhood, is Vornado. It is said through this plan that Vornado will benefit quite well from the new buildings in the Empire Station complex. But as you can see on this map, this is currently what they hold, including the Manhattan Mall and the Hotel Pennsylvania, which I'm going to speak about in a second, but also all of the retail and office space in Moynihan and Farley. And there's Farley. This is a rendering. It's not a picture, but this is supposed to be opening very soon. Again, as I mentioned, with Facebook as the anchor tenant, which was announced this summer as the big victory for office space all over New York, as Facebook was investing in office space at a time when people were not sure what the future of office space was going to look like. Also, they will provide 9th Avenue access to Moynihan as well, not open currently. And Vornado is investing in refacing 2 Penn Plaza. This is a 7th Avenue rendering of what this new rendition of 2 Penn will look like, and a side view. The only thing completed as of now is that entryway, which was MTA. Now I'm going to quickly walk you through the Powerhouse and Hotel Pennsylvania, 2 buildings that are endangered by this new project plan, and then Brad Vogel will take over and introduce you to some others. This building I have been talking about for years on my Remnants of Penn Station tour. One of the things I love about the building is it's a chunk of Penn Station that we had left behind from the 1960s that people don't really recognize, who don't know any better. And it's a real revelation on the tour. And of course, the question that everybody asks me on the tour, thousands of people over the course of 7 years, the first thing they say is it landmarked? And it is not landmarked. It is owned by Amtrak. And again, it is Site 1 on this map where the arrow is, as you can see there. And it is definitely on the chopping block, because that is Site 2 is where they see most of the Penn Station South tracks running under. Now, in this 1910 photo of Penn Station, you will see here, there is the Powerhouse on 31st Street, just south of the station. And this 1941 photo, you'll see it there. It was actually opened almost 2 years before the station, 1908. And it was built to service most of the working needs of the station itself because it was so large. Now, this is the outside of it, very formidable. And what I like to tell people on our tours is, if you just want to get sort of an inkling of what Penn Station used to feel like, look at this building and then imagine it sort of stretching its arms around 3 city streets and 2 avenues. Now, directly from the Pennsylvania Railroad itself is the description of what they called their station service power plant. The building was designed of a height and character to harmonize with the station building, with an endeavor to maintain the standards of the station in all company constructions. The facade is of Stony Creek pink granite, similar in effect to that used for the station. And so what that means is this was built to be an architectural mirror of the station across the street. The building has a frontage of 160 feet and a depth of 95 feet, a height of 86 feet above the curb, and a depth of 49 feet below the curb. Basically, its job was the heating and the lighting of the station and other buildings that went with the station. It did air supply for the signal system, steam, compressed air, and water supply for the train cars. It also did water supply for various purposes in the building, hydraulic power for elevators and lifts. This was the workhorse, literally, of the entire station complex, including, of course, the electric power for the entire complex and the traction power for moving the trains themselves. We were lucky enough to come across, some of you may have read this article that we ran in January, a anonymous member of a Penn Station Facebook group sent over pictures inside the powerhouse. I have not been inside the powerhouse in my time. Amtrak will not let us in. We've tried multiple times, but this gentleman was able to come in, and you can see these photos are a really great look inside the powerhouse themselves. This track indicator board. These, the photos you're looking at are actually from 2018. The last two I have are from 1998. Really interesting ghosts of the inside of the building. And again, one of the things I'd like to hammer home here is, in case you're not familiar with McKim, Mead & White or industrial buildings designed by McKim, Mead & White, this has all of the architectural elements of the firm. And of course, the age and association with Penn makes it something definitely worth landmarking. And in this photo, you can see, again, one of the things comes right to my mind is, especially now that we have Moynihan, you can easily see this building being incorporated into the entrance of, or any part of a new terminal complex for Penn Station South. These are connection tunnels, I believe, back to the station. Again, I'm not speaking with great authority since I have never been in there. These were office spaces on the third floor. There were blueprints and renderings of Pennsylvania Railroad workings all over the network, including this blueprint for improvements to Newark, which I love, and also kind of timely right now. Another access tunnel. These are from 1998. And again, any of you who may have visited or know about M42 in Grand Central Terminal has the same feel, these old turn of the century dials and machinery for the power plant itself, juxtaposed with mid-century as well. And I love this little bit of graffiti on the door for the engineers of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Now, according to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, it has been determined that it is eligible for New York City Landmarks designation. This is actually the quote: located at 236 to 248 West 31st Street, across from MSG. The Penn Station Service Building was built in 1908, 2 years before the completion of the old Pennsylvania Station, which was located directly to the south. McKim, Mead & White designed the structure to supply electricity to the engines going in and out of the station and compressed air for braking and signaling mechanisms. It also generated heat and light for the station. The five-story building is a simple classical structure clad in the same granite of which the station has been constructed. The facade is divided into a large three-story section set on a plinth and capped with a projecting stone cornice, and an attic story with windows. And as you can see, if you've ever seen it in person or just in this photo, it's definitely been neglected over the years, but is still quite a sight. Now, the second building I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to Brad is another very high-profile building associated with the Penn neighborhood, and that is on Site 7, Building 6, which is the Hotel Pennsylvania. Now, the Hotel Pennsylvania was built on land owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad in an attempt to build a flagship hotel connected to the station itself. It was operated by Ellsworth Statler, and there were a chain of Statler hotels at the time, which then eventually get sold over to the Hilton family, Conrad Hilton, I believe in the 50s. I think it was late 50s. This becomes known as the Statler Hilton, which is why we have the Hilton Passageway in the station still to this day. Now, the story of the Hotel Pennsylvania is a very long one. It gets bandied back and forth by different owners over many years. The name changes many times. But one of the things I want to bring out in the Hotel Pennsylvania before I go back to the specifics is this gentleman, who's Samuel Ray, who was the vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time that the station was being constructed. He actually wrote a letter in 1908 to the MAS talking about improvements that needed to be made to the neighborhood, considering, as he calls it, in view of the rather cheap character of the property adjacent to our station. So very much like what you're hearing in the ESD's language, Samuel Ray said the same thing. We need to improve our this neighborhood by beautiful architecture and the treatment of the surrounding neighborhood. And he even said, including improving streets and traffic facilities, which the Pennsylvania Railroad invested a lot of money in doing and was hoping the city would take them up on it. Hotel Pennsylvania was one of those structures, again, that was built in concert with the station, including the post office, including the powerhouse and others. And there was a statue, an Adolf Einman, who was a sculptor for McKimmey and White. It used to be on the plaza right outside of 2 Penn, but it was removed about, I believe it's 2 years ago now. Vernado said it's in holding, and they do not know if it will return, but I would doubt it will come back to the station complex in any way. But that too is an old station remnant. Now back to the Hotel Pennsylvania. This is what the lobby of the Hotel Pennsylvania looked like. Obviously, a gorgeous classical structure, a real McKimmey and White through and through. In 1997, Vernado purchases the building with the intent of demolishing it and replacing it with an office building. And as you can see, over time and some neglect, the Hotel Pennsylvania does suffer quite a bit throughout its history. It does also fall to modernization. This is a current-ish lobby photo. And there was an attempt to landmark it. There was a group in 2006, Save the Hotel Pennsylvania Foundation, which is now known as the Hotel Pennsylvania Preservation Society. They actively tried to get the building landmarked to prevent Vernado from destroying it. Vernado wanted to turn it into an office building with Merrill Lynch as its anchor tenant, but that never happened for them. Then there was an attempt to landmark this room, which is the Café Rouge, which made its cultural debut as a spot where a lot of the big bands from the big band era played, including Glenn Miller and Glenn Miller's very popular song, Pennsylvania 65000, which the Hotel Pennsylvania to this day says is the oldest number in Manhattan. And if you call 212-736-5000, which is the Pennsylvania Exchange, you will still get the Hotel Pennsylvania. Now, this room also suffered over time, but this iconic fountain is still intact in the room. As you can see here from this photo, it was turned into an indoor basketball court for a shoot, and it was called, which I believe was called Terminal 23, and I believe they were trying to use it as an event space. There may be people on this talk who know a lot more about the Hotel Penn than I do. But this is, again, what the Café Rouge looks like currently. And we would lose this building once again to the Empire Station complex. And I end with this photo before I turn it over to Brad, basically to say that a lot of people had said, you know, when they were demolishing Penn, was there any public reaction to it? And yes, there was. There was a group that formed, as you can see here. It's the Action Group for Better Architecture in New York, or as they were known, AGBANY. And this was a photo from the Times in August of 1962 when they went out to protest the demolition of Penn. But one of the things they didn't have on their side was the law, because landmark preservation had not been passed yet. It wouldn't be until 1965. But also, I interviewed 3 members of this group when I was doing research for the show 15 years ago, and they all had the same thing. We were really impassioned by what we believed in, which was we did not want to lose Penn and the architectural heritage of New York, and but we were only talking to each other. We were architects, we were artists, we were academics, and we were just talking to a small group of us. We couldn't cast a wider net than that. So I leave us with the idea that to save these buildings that may be in danger, we do have to cast a wide net. We do have the law on our side, but also the law could be our greatest adversary as well. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brad. So Brad, you can enter the stage, and I'm going to clear out my presentation.
All right.
And Brad, you can take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you for really diving in depth on a number of those points. That's fantastic. And I am going to pull up my presentation here and just make sure that is all working. And we will get going. So my name is Brad Vogel, and I am here today on behalf of the City Club of New York, and I serve on the preservation committee for that organization. Now, Justin mentioned two of the specific buildings that are threatened by the Empire Station complex, and I'm going to walk through a few more of those and a few that aren't landmark eligible, but I want us all to think about the value of those buildings as we make a decision as the public about whether this plan should go forward, because we do have a point of input here, which Simeon will get into further, which is this one hearing by the Empire State Development Corporation on March 29th, 1 week from today, literally 1 week from this exact time. I think it runs from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. So do sign up for that if you get a chance and you want to weigh in with your thoughts. But I got involved with this because I saw the plan over a year ago that was just calling for the demolition of a single block south of Penn Station. And I thought, you know, this is quite something. We really should be looking at this. We should be thinking about what this means and looking at what's at stake in terms of the urban built environment and historic fabric in this site. And so I actually gave a presentation at the Historic Districts Council conference last year in early March, right before the pandemic roared in. And so thank you to Simeon for that. But we talked about that one block. Well, little did I realize, little did anyone realize, I think, for the most part, that we were about to see an entire new metastasized version of that with the Empire Station complex. So here are eligible landmarks in addition to the Powerhouse and the Hotel Pennsylvania that are threatened with demolition by the complex. Now, this is just to reorient ourselves here, and I want to make a key distinction. The area that is bounded by red on the map is what is actually in this Empire Station complex. And the sites that are denoted in yellow are the blocks that would actually get demolished, from what we understand. So you can see this is quite significant. We have multiple blocks worth of historic fabric that would get demolished. And the key blocks where the historic fabric is located is chiefly in Site 2, Site 3, Site 7, and Site 8. And then you'll see that there are a number of buildings in a different radius, which is demarcated by this dotted black line. And those are buildings that are at risk from construction, vibrations, etc. So we'll get to those later, but for now, let's dive in. So the first one that I want to point out is the Stewart Hotel. Now, this is the former Governor Clinton Hotel, and this was built in 1929 with George B. Post, who some of you know, helping with Murgatroyd and Ogden. Now, it's interesting because when you think about Terminal City as a complex around Grand Central Terminal, there is a little bit tighter pattern in terms of when those buildings get built, but around Penn Station, it's a little bit more ad hoc, and there's a sort of a longer lag time between when some of the buildings show up. Now, this building is city landmark eligible, so that means the city, the LPC, Landmarks Preservation Commission, has told us in writing that this building is eligible and rises to the level of an individual city landmark. That's where the real teeth is, as many of you know. City landmark can keep it from getting demolished. State and national register are usually largely honorific or for tax credits, and maybe there's a way where in a Section 106 process that helps. But really what you're looking for to keep it from, Simeon, chime on in.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we actually get this straight. Because you're dealing with state-funded projects, ESDC is largely immune, to my knowledge, to the local landmark authority.
Right, and that's certainly been something with this whole complex, is that it's been essentially set up to steer through bodies that do not have a significant amount of public oversight.
Precisely.
No, but thank you so much for mentioning that, because we are dealing with a somewhat anomalous situation based on how the governor and others have set this up. So taking just a quick look, the other day, a few weeks ago, I had a day off and took a little Jacobsian walk around the neighborhood here and took a look at what's really at stake. Now, I noticed as you get up close that we actually have some squirrels here built into the facade of the Stewart Hotel, which reminded me of the Gray Bar building over in the sort of Terminal City complex, where you have rats running up the awning arms. But with the Governor Clinton, it was squirrels. So lots of little nooks and crannies, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from my walk was there is so much. This is dense historic fabric. There is so much here that's not even fully cataloged, and that hasn't been looked at in a concerted way just yet. Now, this is another one that Justin mentioned. This is St. John the Baptist, a Roman Catholic church. So Napoleon Lebrun, who is certainly known by architectural historians for his ecclesiastical designs, but this was built in the 1870s, so well before Penn Station, old Penn Station, was constructed. And it too is eligible as a city landmark. And I should say for both this one and for the Stewart Hotel, in addition to being city landmark eligible, they are also eligible for the state and national registers. So I did actually peek inside, and there was mass underway. So it is still very much an in-use facility and also holds a shrine to Padre Pio. And I'll go back just one second. So the building in red next to the Gothic church, Gothic Revival Church itself, is the convent, and the building where the rectory used to be, the site where the rectory used to be, was behind the church on the 31st Street side of this property. And that was made in 1974 into a sort of brutalist monastery building. And there's a very interesting piece of artwork. That building has been vacated at this point, and I think was being designed for some other project. But that's another sort of often overlooked element to that complex at St. John the Baptist. All right, so now we get into the Fairmont building. This is also over on 30th Street. And you just have these sort of classical details, and this building was used in the fur trade and with the plumbing trade. It was very much characteristic, and that's the thing. These blocks are rife with buildings that really typify the sort of post-1916 zoning law, sort of garment district, midtown building type. But so many of them, as much as some of the language that Justin was quoting from the report, as much as it is sort of denigrated as being run down or outmoded, it is still very much full of life. And so when the decision is being made about what to do with these blocks, whether to clear them wholesale, I do think a key question is, are we looking at this, are we truly counting the value that exists here? This is the Penn Terminal building. Now this is over on 7th Avenue proper. You've probably seen this as you're walking into Penn Station. This one, like the previous one, the Fairmont, are not city landmark eligible according to LPC, but they're eligible for the state and national register. Now, again, here's a building that is very much in full use with lots of different offices. And again, we're talking about a 17-story building just being taken out. And again, the question is the Empire Station complex really about transit access, or is it really about commercial real estate? And I think that's a very important foundational or threshold question when considering this whole complex. Now let's move on, because it's rather interesting as you walk around the district, things you might think would be city eligible, city landmark eligible, that are not according to LPC, at least in terms of what they've written on a list to date. So here are just some other buildings that are inside the complex site that would be demolished. So you have classic corner buildings with you know, the classic cornices and fire escapes and corbels and the whole 9 yards, very much in use over on 8th Avenue. You have, again, this sort of classic wedding cake ziggurat buildings, which in New York are somewhat anonymous buildings. They are buildings that are often overlooked, and in, say, a small or medium-sized city elsewhere, they might be the tallest building in town or the focal point of a city. So again, it's important when we're working with a site that's this large, that involves this many buildings, to step back and look at each block with a little bit more granularity to see what's actually at stake. You also have things like this hand-rolled cigar shop, where you have cultural elements, practices woven into some of the businesses that would be displaced by this project. Here again, you have, this is sort of your classic slight Gothic motif, Gothic sort of leaning into deco, with the setbacks from the 1916 zoning law to allow just a little bit of light to come down. But this too would be demolished in Site 2. And just to go over it again, this is the scale and the density of the existing historic fabric that is at risk in some of these blocks. Now, very quickly, I did want to go out to the adverse effects. Those were buildings that would be demolished outright. These are buildings that stand to have adverse effects from the construction, the vibration. So let's take a very quick look. Again, what we're talking about here are buildings that are outside of the red line, but inside the black line. And I'm not even going to go into most of them. You should check out Michelle's piece at Untapped Cities, which really does a nice job with a photo spread. But here are 3 that are relatively close to the site. So this is St. Francis Church, I believe it is, over just to the east of the intended complex. And this is the building that's immediately across from Penn Station, that I'm sure you've seen if you have walked out of that 7th Avenue entrance and exit for the station. This building, just to be clear, would, even though it is surrounded by blocks that would be demolished for the complex, is not intended to be demolished. And here we have yet another church. I believe this is St. Michael's. And I'm realizing as I'm going through here that in that other category, I did not even include Gimbels, which is part of the back of that entire city block that includes Hotel Pennsylvania. That too would be demolished. So I will turn it over to Simeon now to tell us a little bit about what we might do about all of this if we are feeling so inclined.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Simeon Bankoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. For the 5 people who might not be on the HGC mailing list, the Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We've been around for over 50 years, and we work to help preserve the physical and architectural character of New York City. We also, as an umbrella group, our primary constituency is about 500 neighborhood-based groups, all volunteers, and enthusiasts like yourselves. So we really depend on local groups and people coming together to help save the city. Now, actually, what Brad was talking about is one of my favorite planning terms. It's called an APE, which is the area of potential effect. If you saw on that on that map, the area of potential effect usually is about 400 feet from the project area within a dense part of Manhattan, like Pennsylvania Station. That reaches all the way to Broadway in the high 20s is what we're talking about. Basically, the small buildings that we just rescued after 13 years on Tin Pan Alley could potentially have impacts from this plan. I cannot stress strongly enough the level of potential domino effect of the moving of air rights back and forth, the encouragement of large scale large-scale commercial development, which, as somebody has pointed out on the chat, what are we actually building all this large-scale development for? We're in a place right now in our history of development, where we are really re-examining whether or not we are going to be building the kind of office space that we had in the past. Frankly, there's a lot of very vacant office space in Manhattan right now. So do we really need the, I believe it was 16 million square feet of commercial office space to be built? Terrific that we are attracting tech hubs, terrific that we are attracting new money and larger companies to New York. That the very premise of cities are that you run into each other, that you have a certain density that allows creative foment to happen. But this is crazy. Why should we allow this New York State to do a massive land grab in order to expand a couple of subway platforms and give us slightly larger sidewalks? It genuinely makes no sense. So that being said, my role here is to sort of walk through some of the ideas and some of the terms that were brought up. A lot of the terms that we have been talking about was something that was mentioned often was New York City eligible. Now, as people may or may not be aware, there are a number of different levels of landmark eligibility, but basically it comes down to there is municipal landmarking, New York City landmarks, and state and national register landmarks. Those are two tracks that can run parallel. They inform each other, but they're not dependent on each other, and they're not determinative of each other. They are two different agencies. There is the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission that we all know and love. That is a city agency. And then there is the New York State Office of Historic Preservation, which is underneath the State Parks Department. Again, they are collegial, but they are two separate processes. When there is an environmental review that is done, both agencies will often. What happens is this whatever agency is trying to push this forward. In this case, it was the Empire State Development Corporation, ESDC, that kind of makes the determination of eligibility for the state and national register, which I will just call SNR because it's faster. The goal of an environmental review is to create a situation where government action is, in a perfect world, you are looking at what a government action might affect on the environmental level, air quality, light, sound, traffic, shadows, and what we specialize in, and what I think everybody's very interested in, is quality of life and historic and cultural resources. It is important to identify those historic and cultural resources before you start saying, okay, these are going to be lost. The premise of this whole talk is they've actually identified a number of resources that are going to be lost. This is the thing that is going to happen, as well as an additional 30 plus that are going to be negatively impacted. The concern is, so that's what happens is the state says these are eligible on the state register, and they have a mitigation process. The city says these are buildings that could be eligible for city listing. Now, the difficulty is that the city doesn't really have a mitigation process per se with regards to government action. Much of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, that again we all know and love, does not have the statutory authority to actually stop other city agencies from doing terrible, terrible things to landmark buildings. We just lost, for example, or we're in the process of losing one of the few landmarks, one of the earlier landmarks in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. the old police precinct house on 4th Avenue and 43rd Street, which is being demolished, largely demolished. A little bit of some portion of the facade is going to be kept, and that's being done under the School Construction Authority. The School Construction Authority likewise took down an individual landmark property on the Grand Concourse because it was fire damaged, and the New York City Landmarks Commission didn't even have a hearing about either of these. They had a hearing about the one on the Grand Concourse where they were forced to sort of sit there and take it. That doesn't mean, morally speaking and under the rule of law, that the Landmarks Commission should not act. The Landmarks Commission must act to protect these buildings. As Brad was saying, and as people in the chat were talking about, this is very similar and very analogous to the terminal city development that happened around Grand Central Station, Grand Central Terminal, in that many of these buildings were developed precisely around Penn Station. Because we lost Penn Station so many years ago, it is all the more important to keep as a memory, to keep as part of the cityscape, this very important urban construction, which frankly works. That is the thing that we're also missing, which is these are buildings that work. The Hotel Pennsylvania, while it could be better run, and I'm sure the rooms could be upgraded, that is a question for interior design and better Wi-Fi, and perhaps a new operator. It is not a question of demolishing a giant building in order to build a new giant building. You'd still have the problems of operation. You'd still have the problems of amenities. These are not things that are cured by demolition and rebuilding. The only thing that is cured by demolition and rebuilding are the bottom line for the people whose business it is to build new buildings. For them, it makes a lot of sense. For everybody else, and for New York, it doesn't. So the important thing here is the Landmarks Commission must act. The State Historic Preservation Office must also weigh in and feel that they can, because they're a state agency that interacts with other state agencies, and this is going on through a state, it's the governor's plan, for God's sakes. They are actually in a position to help mitigate and perhaps even prevent the worst aspects of this from happening. That's what they're designed to do. But they need help. They eventually work for the governor, and this is the governor's plan. What we need to do, we as citizens, we as people who care about New York, need to really create a large fuss. We need to tell our elected officials that this is an incredibly important thing, and that we will not accept them allowing the governor, who is frankly in not great political water at the moment, to seize the heart of Midtown Manhattan. We can do this through a number of ways. Sign the petition, which is what Brad is just sending you. This is very important because in addition to showing popular support for the issue, it will also be of help when the coalition launches the second phase of our efforts to get these buildings landmarked, which is going to be, a direct mail, letters to the decision makers. And by decision makers, I mean not only our friends, the commissioners at the state and at the city level, but their bosses, the elected officials who appoint them, who will start understanding that they are going to go to every time they stand up in public, there are going to be people asking them about this. This is really key. We also need people to attend the hearing next Monday. I put the these are the weirdest kind of meetings. They are very boring, they are very long, and they are incredibly important. They do not expect people to show up. They do not expect the public to take notice. This might indeed be the only public hearing on this process. There might be other ones, but a lot of the decisions will have taken place already. There are strategies that can happen along the line. We might be able to get a arcane group called the Public Authority to act in this manner. But again, that requires political effort, and we need to sort of show that boulder rolling down the hill at people. We also need, and this is why I'm so thankful to our friends at Untapped for doing this. This is the this is, as far as I know, the first public discussion of this plan. We're very grateful for Brad showing up 2 days before lockdown at the HGC's conference last year. That is actually there's a recording of it on YouTube. If you want to see that, I will put that in the chat when I get a chance. But this has not been reported in the press. It's even with the dearth of public reporting that has happened, and as local journalism has gotten strangled, there's nothing out there. There are people. This is an election year, for God's sakes. Almost every local official is running for office. There are people who are running for the city council seat over here. There are people who are running for Manhattan Borough President. There are people running for mayor, as you are all aware. None of them have addressed any of this. This is shocking. So what you can do, what everyone on this video can do, is circulate this. Send out Michelle's terrific article. Put it on your social media. Tweet about it. Put it on Facebook. Put it on Instagram. Put it on all those things that I'm an old and no longer know what it's about. So the more get shocked, you get the kind of questions. What are they talking about? Who's imagining this? You might not have answers, but you never know who might actually hear this, and all of a sudden you have a reporter from a large daily picking this up. All of a sudden, maybe one of your friends or your someone's friend of a friend works for New York One, works for a television agency that picks this up as a real issue, and suddenly it becomes an issue. This is going on under the cover of darkness. The governor attempted to put $1.3 billion into the budget in early March in order for acquisition and demolition of buildings. That was going to be funding eminent domain. No one was really aware of this. Fortunately, there are some smart people who we talked to up in Albany who pointed this out. Thankfully, Senator Brad Hoylman, who is running for Manhattan Borough President at the moment, says, got it out of the Senate budget. I am understanding that Dick Godfrey, the assemblyman from the Upper West Side, who represents this section too, I believe, got it out of the assembly budget. So it looks it is not going to be in the budget, but if it hadn't been for our colleagues in the in the Preservation League of New York State, we would not have heard of this. The only press outside of Untapped that we've heard of was the New York Post decided to run something playing on the governor's current issues with sexual harassment, because our colleague Layla Lagazico from Community Board 5, who's been really on top of this, said that she has been abused. She didn't say sexually abused, just being treated poorly the way the state can treat anybody when they want to stonewall. That she's being stonewalled by the state about this, and that got something in the Post. But we really need the louder the noise and the more noise and just the more volume about this cannot be overemphasized. I'm going to turn this over, call on my friends if they have any questions or want to keep me kind of moving this along. Justin, did you want me to go through exactly how something becomes landmarked?
You know what? Let's address some questions because we're over.
Sure.
It's over 7. Let's talk about some of the questions that came up that have not been addressed yet, and then we could go back to the process. Also, because I'm thinking probably a lot of people on this.
A lot of people are familiar, and it's really
familiar
easy.
with the process. What was a real benefit was you talking about how the state can basically ignore all of that if they want to with power that they have. So again, both Simeon and Brad brought to our attention the need for urgency with this and the fact that it's being buried among other stories that involve not only the pandemic, but also what's going on with the governor is a disadvantage to us at the moment. I'm going to go to the questions tab and just go to some of the questions that were not answered. Some are Penn related, which I can answer. Others I may need to defer. So the most recent question, which came in on the tab, was from Miles. And he said, how can overcrowded Penn Station be expanded without demolishing adjacent buildings? Is it possible to build underneath without disrupting above? So in my opinion, which is not a professional one, but just again, I believe all of this rigmarole is really to avoid getting rid of Madison Square Garden, which would really quite benefit Penn Station greatly. To get that monster off of its back would certainly improve circulation. It would improve light. It would improve navigability over across the street. And you wouldn't have to use the excuse of destroying all the rest of these buildings to put glass monsters to improve access to Penn. You wouldn't need to do it. But Cuomo, from the very beginning of this plan, said he had no intention of moving Madison Square Garden, even though its operating permit is up in 2023, which I think was a shock to everybody in 2013 when that happened. They got the 10-year limit. And then, of course, everybody's imaginations went wild. They had those ideas competitions. And it was like, what could we do with Penn? And Cuomo came in very promptly and said, no. This is what I'm going to do with Penn, basically. Which is, I believe the plan, there is a plan within a plan, which is called the Penn Station Master Plan. The Penn Station Master Plan, according to the state, cannot be completed until the Empire Station Complex plan is completed. And the Penn Station Master Plan is basically, as far as I know, because there's not a lot of information on it, is get rid of the theater under Madison Square Garden and provide more access way, basically via 8th Avenue. That's one of the parts of the plan. Cindy asked, will Penn Station under Madison Square Garden remain? What about the waiting area with the beautiful old original metal red frame? So Cindy, yes, I mean, Penn Station isn't really going anywhere. The Penn Station that we sort of know, and I say love, is not one of the things that is a problem. Is it won't be changing per se, with the exception of the resurfacing and refacing of the LIRR, which the red frame that you're talking about is in the LIRR. It's right in front of the waiting room. And our contacts at the MTA said that remnant will be intact. They're not removing it, thankfully. So for the foreseeable future, that's not changing, even depending on what this Empire Station complex is doing. I'm going to go through. Jory, Buffalo has a great old Statler hotel with a very similar design. That is very true. There is currently new ownership and they're looking to preserve and improve that building. Have you been in touch with the people in Buffalo working on that project? No, but I actually stayed in that hotel when I worked at, I'm working on a project with the SS Columbia, which Brad, you are also associated with, by the way. And I went up to Buffalo to spend some time on the ship and I stayed in that hotel and it's gorgeous. They did a really good job. And that is a very—
Is that great hotel right by the convention center?
Yes, I believe so. And I cannot remember the name of it.
I was in it when it was like under scaffolding, and the National Trust had a conference there in Buffalo like 7 years ago.
Yeah,
it was completely phantasmagoric. It was awful. It was awesome. It was just great.
They did a really great job with it, including the ballrooms are amazing. And they kept them. Actually, there was a wedding going on the weekend that I was there, and it was just a gorgeous sight. And hopefully I'll remember the name before the end of the presentation. Michael asked, do they use the Powerhouse now? No, the Powerhouse is basically what Amtrak calls it, is basically storage right now. But they are not. There is no active use as far as I know. If anybody knows anything different, Michelle and I went on a walkthrough with Amtrak officials. This is now almost going to be 2 summers ago, so summer 2019. We asked them to bring them, can we go into the powerhouse? They said, what do you want to go in there for? Well, we're really interested. What are the plans? And they said, well, we'd really love to convert it into a simulation facility for our conductors. We'd love to keep the building where it is. We think it would be a great handoff to Penn. And then they both of them, there were two of them, they both looked at the ground and they said, but that will depend on what the state wants to do. And of course, our hearts sunk because we knew what that was all about. But right now, there is no direct use. Cindy, I'm so sorry I did not say what street the powerhouse is on. That's my bad. It's on 31st Street, between 8th and 7th, directly across from Madison Square Garden. Let's see, Susan, how this can continue to be greenlit funded when we know for a fact that NYC no longer needs office space. I've seen a lot of these comments going on. Susan, I believe you also put a link to a news story. 4 out of 5 NYC businesses will not be bringing back their full workspace to offices. Yeah, no, we know this. This pandemic, although we know it will get better and we know that life will get back to normal, office usage will not be the way it used to be. Businesses are realizing they can cut costs by keeping people telecommuting at home. People are getting very used to it now. We do not have any need for 14 million gross square footage of office space. So says me. With lots of people working from home, how do you propose to fill these buildings up? Correct. Why build new office spaces? All right. So I feel like there were a couple of new questions that came in. Isn't this all from Lloyd? Isn't this all about A, Vernado wanting to upstage Hudson Yards, and B, Cuomo's desire to be the master builder? Evidence is that nothing at the station will improve for at least 10 years. So Lloyd, I'm going to say I think you're very much correct. This is a real sweetheart deal for Vernado. You'll notice that Vernado's one office building that's almost 50 years old doesn't get touched in this. It's absolutely fine. Then everything else in the area gets built up around it. And I do believe that this is a Cuomo legacy. Cuomo wants this to say he's put a stamp on it. It's the same with the Kosciuszko. It's the same with all of his projects, for better or for worse. He wants to be known as a master builder. Alexander, have you reached out to the National Trust yet? I have not. Has anybody else?
The National Trust are our colleagues. We talk with them. They really take a lot of their lead from local and state partners. So, they're a large national organization whom we love, but we kind of need to, if anybody wants to reach out to our friends, Sari Warden and stuff like that, please feel free. We talk to them regularly, but they also rely greatly on local groups to provide their leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Simeon. If anyone knows Sari, or you want to work with us to reach out to her and convince the trust to get more involved, let's work together.
Right. Jory asked, moving backwards again, if you remove MSG, can you build the second level platforms like Grand Central? That would be very hard. I think that what Penn really needs is a thoughtful track expansion. They want to run Metro North access down to Penn. They want to create 4 new stations on the east side of the Bronx, which I actually think is needed for that area. I'm not personally, again, I'm not adverse to them creating these 8 new platforms. What I am adverse to is destroying the buildings on top for no good reason. You don't need to. There's no need to destroy the buildings to create Penn Station South. So I think you could have your cake and eat it too here. You can have your 8 tracks and you can have your landmark buildings. And somebody, I think Cindy put right at the top, maybe the powerhouse can be turned into some sort of museum, items from the original Penn. There's endless possibilities with you could do with the powerhouse. You can make it a grand entryway. You can turn it into Moynihan too. You can let light sort of spill down onto the tracks under. I mean, I just have all of these crazy dreams of what they could do with this powerhouse. And again, I've been saying this, and I know Michelle quoted me on this. Basically, what we do is when we take the powerhouse down, and as Simeon and Brad said, these buildings that were built around the fulcrum of the station, we are demolishing Penn a second time. This is something that nobody thought possible, that we could even have an idea of committing such a heinous act on architecture in New York again. And here we are doing it again or proposing it again. It boggles my mind. Why would we do this when there is so much preservation? And again, as I said in Michelle's article, Moynihan has spoiled us. We know what we can do now with landmark buildings and infrastructure. So there's no excuse not to, as far as I'm concerned. Cindy, haven't they learned how disturbing it has been that they destroyed Penn and they're doing it again? Right. Again, it's just history repeating itself again for profit and business and legacy. Is there a planned in-person protest regarding this issue? I will be more than willing to join. I'm on multiple campaigns and will address this issue with candidates for the 2021 elections. Christian, thank you very much. That's awesome. Nothing, as far as I know, gentlemen, yet about an in-person protest. Yet I think there still has to be some more details that are fleshed out about this. There's a lot of dark areas still in this plan. Mainly funding and mainly timeline are still a big question mark, I believe, unless Simeon or Brad, you want to jump in there?
No, it's a lot of moving parts.
Right.
I am willing to say that at some point, there definitely will be in-person protests.
Yes.
However, those are still in the future, but we will keep everybody posted. And the second we start having ideas about it, y'all will know.
Yeah, exactly. You all will know. We now are all connected in contact with you. Miles, are there any plans to consider through running of trains by merging New Jersey Transit with LIRR, with changing Penn from a terminal station to a through station, reduce congestion and therefore the need to expand through demolition? That has been discussed. That has been thought about. It's a good idea. I don't think it's on the state's radar. It's not in any of their plans. It's not a bullet point under the Penn Station master plan as of right now. I think that's a big, huge political issue because Jersey has to get involved, which we know has already bitten us in the rear end with the North River, the tunnels, which are actually the biggest elephant in the room is the fact we need new underground access to Penn from the south, or we're in big trouble when those 116-year-old tunnels just are too tired to handle us anymore. But that's a whole other talk. It's a whole other issue. And again, being ignored by this wasteful development of a neighborhood, it doesn't address any of the main infrastructural projects. Mm-hmm. Have any journalists been contacted about investigating Vernato's lobbying efforts with the state government, considering its past and the appearance of preferential treatment? Vernato is a big player in New York. Very true. We have not made any overtures to any other outlets yet. As Untapped, we try not to get involved politically. This is our biggest foray into sort of stepping out to help preservation, which is our bag. But yeah, 7:30 because we have taken quite a bit of your time. Jory says the simpler alternative to a merger has been suggested: terminate New Jersey Transit trains in Queens and LIRR trains in Secaucus and free up Penn Station resources in this way. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. All of them would require terminating trains in other locations and not, causing congestion at Penn. Those, I believe, are definitely far down the line alternatives. I think the concentration right now has to be in figuring out whether the station, including Moynihan, what Moynihan did was it improved aesthetically the Penn Station complex. It's not Penn, it's Moynihan. And it improved waiting room capacity by 50%, which was much needed, but it hasn't solved any of the operational problems underground, which have to be addressed. And of course, as I've said before, neither is this plan. This plan is not doing that as well, with the exception of the 8 new tracks, which can be done without the disruption.
Something we brought up also is that.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, that we have a new federal administration who is characterized by their devotion to train travel. Right. So we are operating under different circumstances than we were both between COVID and with a Biden administration versus a Trump administration. So we really need to put the brakes on this particular plan and let the realities of what we are now, let the new world that we have shake out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and Justin, one other thing I wanted to mention too is because I think in some ways the likelihood that these buildings will survive may seem unlikely, may seem dire, may seem small. But if you look back at the history of preservation in this city, victory has sometimes been snatched from the absolute jaws of defeat. So it is certainly possible, and it's why I think we all fight. It's why we do what we do. It's why we bother to lift our voices at all. So that crucial word that you mentioned earlier when someone asked when the protests, or are there protests planned in person, and you said not yet. The yet is crucial because, as Simeon indicated, they are almost certainly coming, and I hope that everyone on this program will be joining us.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why my last slide was the Ag Batney protest slide, because those guys, even though they had the cards stacked against them, their legacy continues to inform us of the mistake that we made, and that's why we have to take up the work to make sure it doesn't happen again. This is the thing I'm going to hit home all the time. We are better than this. We can learn from history. We can have a really great future in neighborhoods with beautifully landmarked buildings repurposed correctly. We don't have to tear them down. We don't have to create these monoliths against the sky that are not needed. And yes, we will be front and center to do whatever we need to do. And I think at 27, are there any final points, gentlemen, that you would like to make before I close out this presentation?
Nope, just sign that.
I'd just like to thank all of our strong support partners, Untapped, City Club, all of the people who supported this in putting this together. I think this is a really important thing, and that we are, God willing, getting in front of this boulder.
Yes, I agree. I think we're just sort of bringing it out of the dark and into the light and the attention of those who are going to care about it. So that's great. We thank all of you for joining us tonight. This was a very well-attended event, and we thank you for your support in signing the petition, in joining us next week, next Monday at 5 p.m. to go to that public hearing, for contacting local politicians, for any journalist friends or connections that you may have. Let's get this out there. And thank you. Joe Holmes, actually, Joe Holmes from London brought up a very good point I have not addressed. If you are out of the country and would like to sign the petition, you can use the Untapped New York address, which actually I am going to put in the chat before we sign off. So if you are outside of the country watching this and want to sign the petition, it does require an American address. Please use Untapped, which I'm putting in there right now. And that would be awesome. It doesn't matter if we have a bunch of 1,000 Dean Streets. And the zip code is 7, I believe. There you go. That is Untapped New York's address. Robin asks, is there a form letter we can send out? Simeon, is it possible that we can email a form letter out later on?
That will be phase 2. We need to actually get finalize our request to the Landmarks Commission first.
Okay.
But
okay.
Everything else being equal, we hope to be having that taken care of by the end of this week. But so just be prepared to get another email saying, now's your chance to send out a form letter.
Okay. So stay tuned. Basically, we will let you know when that time has come. Again, you've all joined us tonight, so we will have we have your email addresses. We also have you through Untapped. We'll put stuff out as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Susan Hess, it is virtual, by the way. Sorry, she asked an important question. The hearing next week is virtual. It is not in person. You have the link. And on that, thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. This was a pleasure. And I will be back around with you. Have a good night, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.
Take care.